You're listening to Insight here on Cap Radio. I'm your host, Vicki Gonzalez. South Lake Tahoe is home to just over 20,000 residents, but it likely goes without saying that the city can easily grow to six figures throughout the year. The tourism economy is strong, but that also has created affordability issues for those who love to live, work, and play in the South Shore. A local measure on the November ballot is coined as helping to create affordable housing, but it's sparking quite the debate about property rights. Measure N would allow the city of South Lake Tahoe to tax homeowners whose properties remain vacant a majority of the year. Those against the measure believe it's an assault on their property rights, while others believe it's a viable solution to curbing the rising costs to live in South Lake Tahoe. We're going to hear arguments for and against Measure N, and we're starting with the group that placed the measure on the ballot. Amelia Richmond is the co-founder of Locals for Affordable Housing and a supporter for Yes on Measure N. Amelia, welcome to Insight.
Thanks so much for having me, Vicki.
Well, let's get into Locals for Affordable Housing, this group, who is involved, and what went into making it happen.
Yeah, so we, last year, the city actually studied different funding sources to try to address the rising housing crisis in South Lake Tahoe. And a vacancy tax was one of the initiatives that they studied. They actually found that it would raise more funds than any other proposals considered. But due to the political climate on city council, they elected not to move forward with it. And we felt as a citizens group that this was something that we really needed for our community, that it was a really viable solution that addressed both the way to shift incentives towards full-time occupancy and use more of the housing we have, while also solving some of the much-needed funding sources we need in our community. So we gathered together a group of volunteers. We had about 85 folks helping us at different points throughout the winter to gather more than 2,400 signatures to get Measure N on the ballot in order to really just try to move forward with impactful solutions in our community.
For those who don't live in South Lake Tahoe, can you help lay out from your perspective the main problems when it comes to affordable housing?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, 44% of all housing units in the city of South Lake Tahoe are sitting unoccupied for the majority of the year, and that's per census data. And even the bigger issue is that the rate's increasing. So back in 2000, per census data, we had 33% vacancy rate, but that's increased to 44% now. In that time, as a community, we built over 2,200 new housing units, but many of those were second homes, and some actually other existing homes became second homes. So even though we built over 2,200 housing units, more of them became unoccupied, leaving us with more than 300 less housing units for our workforce. Now the vacancy rate in Tahoe City on the North Shore is 70%. It's been devastating to their community. Their businesses can't find workers to staff their businesses. It's really impacted the fabric of their society and their schools. And so we're just trying to shift the trajectory so that we don't end up where they are, so that we can actually protect our community and make sure we can continue to house our workforce, have local families, have neighbors in our neighborhoods. That's why we're doing what we're doing.
Okay, so Measure N, if it is approved, it would be a tax for property owners whose properties remain vacant for more than half of the year. How would it actually work? How would you find these homeowners, and what kind of tax would they be paying?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's very straightforward. It is a self-reported form that homeowners like myself would fill out once a year. So I own my house near the Y in South Lake Tahoe. What this would mean for me as a homeowner, that once a year I'd fill out this form, say I lived here more than 183 days over the whole course of the year, and sign my name. And that would be it. And so the idea isn't to create this large burden of proof. No one needs to be keeping receipts. You don't need to be keeping a detailed calendar. By and large, when other cities have rolled these out, people don't lie on their taxes. When you sign it as an affidavit, you are saying you're telling the truth. There are penalties for folks who are caught lying, and a small spot audit process that the city has identified they would be able to do. But the idea is not to have neighbors telling on neighbors. The idea is just that we're saying, look, there is a cost to our community when homes sit unoccupied for the majority of the year. It means less folks here participating in our economy on a regular basis. It means means their kids aren't enrolled in school here. We don't get that attendance-based funding. So it's saying, hey, we love if you could occupy your home more often, if you could be here, if you can't be here, maybe you could find a renter part-time who could, so that we can have folks here. And if you can't do that, that's okay too. But here's an economic offset you can pay once a year, so that when you're able to come use your house, you can be part of a vibrant, thriving community that can sustain its workforce.
I've read somewhere that the tax would start off at $3,000 a year, could go up to $6,000 a year in the following year. So that ranges from, $250 to $500 a month if you spaced it out throughout the year. Is there a cap? Or if this is approved, could this go above $6,000 a year in, say 10 years from now?
It could not. No. So what you identified is absolutely correct in terms of the pricing structure. In California, because we have Prop 13, you cannot raise property taxes as a percentage of home value. So that is why it's a flat rate, as you mentioned. Berkeley did something similar. They're using the same rates. The idea is to find a balance of a price that's actually, or an amount that's going to incentivize some folks to use their homes more or rent to someone who can, without it being, as high of a burden of places like Vancouver, where they're actually looking at 3% of total home value. In California, you can't write property tax increases as a percentage of home value. That is why it's a flat rate. I know people have a lot of questions about that. But to answer your question, no, it is indexed to inflation. So it can go up with inflation, but it cannot escalate. It cannot be just reassessed at some much higher value. When voters get to vote on this measure, they're saying $3,000 for the first year of property sets unoccupied, $6,000 for subsequent years. And then if it's occupied for a year, no tax ever. And then it would reset to those lower rates.
What do you say to property owners who own a second home in South Lake Tahoe? Some have been passed down through generations. And ultimately, they don't have a voice in this, right? Because they don't get to vote on a local measure. But it directly affects, not only their property, but their income as well.
Yeah. So to folks who own second homes in our community, I think you are an important part of our community as second homeowners. And we know that and we value that. The issue is that the percentage of second homeownership in our community is increasing. And if we don't find a way to shift those incentives, you will not be able to come and visit the South Lake Tahoe that you know and love. Right now, our population, our community is down 10% since 2000. We've lost 35% of our children in that time. School enrollment's down 36%. We've lost 24% of working age adults. And so when you want to come up and you want to go to a restaurant or go out for coffee or rent a boat, those businesses rely on local staff in order to provide those services and to have a thriving tourism economy and to have a vibrant community. And so we would love if you could spend more time here investing in our businesses on a regular basis. If that's not possible, this is an economic offset so that when you're able to come visit your home, you can be part of a thriving community and feel good that we haven't taken this really tough hit collectively with this increasing percentage of second homes. We don't want to become the next Aspen. I hope you don't either.
There have also been questions about how the money raised from this proposed tax, how it would be spent. An El Dorado County Superior Court judge ruled that the language on the ballot had to be changed. Initially, it said, a yes on N would mean that it can only be spent on housing, roads, and transit. It now reads housing, roads, transit, and necessary administrative costs. So that seems pretty broad when you bring in administrative costs. Where would the money go, and how would it be earmarked for affordable housing, which is the root cause of this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So the city, once we got the signatures to put Measure N on the ballot, the city studied it, and they did it with an impartial analysis. And that impartial analysis showed that the administration costs would be roughly 3% of the total revenue raised. So that's really what we're looking at. And so I really think that was a bit of a political tactic on behalf of the opposition. I think we are also, we're a grassroots initiative. We're still learning how to do this. We're learning, the kind of ins and outs of how ballot arguments work. So in our mind, of course, it pays for its own administration. I think that's good policy. I think most would agree. But yes, we should have written it that way, and now it is amended to be correct. But it is a special tax, and the funding can only be used for local housing, roads, transit, and of course, its own administration, estimated at 3%. We have major funding gaps in our community on all three of these things. Housing is the largest priority, and that is a big piece of where the funds will be spent in our community. The incentives alone also create more housing. So that impartial analysis that the city did estimated that Measure N would help us recover 1,500 full-time households in our community, which is about the population we've lost since 2000. And that the economic benefit of more people being here full time would be an estimated to $27 million boost in local retail spending each year. So that's just by nature of more people being in our community. And so it really does show that there is an economic cost to having nearly half of homes unoccupied most of the time. That's what we're looking to do here. We're looking to incentivize more occupancy of the homes and to create these funding sources so we can build more housing, fix our roads, improve our transit, and have a vibrant, thriving community.
And that is all the time we have. Thank you so much, Amelia.
All right. Thank you, Vicki. Appreciate the time.
Amelia Richmond is the co-founder for Locals for Affordable Housing and a proponent for Yes on Measure N. You're listening to Insight here on Cap Radio, and if you're just joining us, we're talking about a contentious measure on the ballot in South Lake Tahoe that would allow the city to tax homeowners whose properties remain vacant a majority of the year. So we just heard arguments supporting Measure N. We're now going to hear the opposition. The city's Chamber of Commerce has joined a coalition of organizations against Measure N. Steve Teshara is the Director of Government Relations at the Tahoe Chamber and is a co-chair of No on Measure N. Welcome.
Thank you, Vicki.
So from your perspective, why, and also lumped with the Tahoe Chamber, which you are a part of, what is the main problem and your main issues with Measure N?
It's poorly written. It was grabbed from another community, which is not the same kind of community as South Lake Tahoe. And it was basically the signatures were gathered by telling people it was a solution for affordable housing, which it is not. And I can go into the reasons based on your questions.
Okay. Well, I mean, also, there's no doubt that affordable housing is an issue in South Lake Tahoe. We've had these conversations on Insight, not only the South Shore, the North Shore as well, especially in recent years. And so what do you say to residents who feel that the status quo isn't really helping people who want to live, but they work in South Lake Tahoe, but they have to commute long distances because they can't actually afford to live in the city?
Understood. So it just so happens we're having this conversation on the day that the new Sugar Pine Village deed restricted affordable housing development is opening its first phase. So ultimately, that will be 248 units of deed restricted affordable housing that will really make a difference in the community. Are we going to be able to find affordable housing for everybody in the community that wants it? Most likely not. We are governed by the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, which has very strict development limits, as you know, Vicki, and caps on the kinds of things that can be done. I think TRPA is coming around and changing some of their rules and codes to make more types of affordable housing possible. One of the big ones is accessory dwelling units, which is now California allows those up and down the state, but it's taken TRPA a little bit more time to get to the point where we can do that at Lake Tahoe. And there's all kinds of different affordable housing types that we need. The city of South Lake Tahoe earlier this year was designated by the state of California, by the governor, as a pro-housing community. So they're now eligible for additional grants and funds because the state has recognized that South Lake Tahoe is one of 10 communities in the state that is really doing a lot to try to address the affordable housing issue. So right now, there's a $3 million grant application the city just put forward under that pro-housing designation. Our chamber wrote a letter of support for that grant application. And there's other things that are going on in the city that are toward the solving the problem. And again, getting back to Measure N, it doesn't stipulate that there's any money for housing. It doesn't show how that's going to happen. And if you don't have places to put it, you could throw a lot of money at it, but it still won't happen. But I do want to give a shout out to, for instance, the St. Joseph Community Land Trust. They do affordable housing in the community. It's a small scale, but everything helps. Recently, they did something that we think that they're trying to do more of, which is they actually bought a piece of property from the city of South Lake Tahoe for $1 and developed 3 for sale affordable housing homes, because not everybody wants to rent. Some people would like to buy a home. And so, and St. Joseph's is working on similar projects and trying to do more things to help more people. Again, it's a small scale, but everything helps. Lake Tahoe Community College, in the midst of South Lake Tahoe, is underway with the construction of 100 units of student housing on campus. You'll have to be a student going to Lake Tahoe Community College, but that's 100 units, and that's students that aren't going to be out in the broader community looking for housing because they can have it right on campus. So it's really, a multifaceted set of challenges, and it's not something that you can take other people's money to throw at or other people's properties to use, because the people we've spoken to as we've gone through this journey may not want to rent their house, and they may not be able to afford the penalties if they don't. And a lot of tears, a lot of sadness, a lot of family memories that are at stake.
If roughly half, a little less than half of the homes available are vacant in South Lake Tahoe, that creates a supply and demand issue. And it's not only isolated to South Lake Tahoe. Rents and housing has gone up across California, including here in Sacramento. Why do you think there has been an increasing affordability issue in South Lake Tahoe?
Well, I think it's on a number of levels. Certainly, this community is perhaps a more expensive place to live than others. But there's other factors involved in affordability. As you know, there are increased costs for utilities, the increased costs for things like sewer, water, electricity, natural gas, and of course, the cost of insurance. The insurance issue is a huge part of what we're all dealing with in California and elsewhere, but certainly here at Lake Tahoe as well. So there's a lot of different factors. It isn't just the affordability of the houses. And a lot of the houses, if they were going to be rented, the price would not be affordable. You just don't take a particular house and say, yes, I'll rent it to you for an affordable rate when you didn't buy it necessarily for an affordable price, or a price that you could turn around then and afford to rent it to somebody for a lower than what your costs for owning the home are. So, I think for our chamber and for the Keep Community First Coalition, of which we are a part, it's really the long-term sitting down at meetings, hammering out solutions. It's not a quick fix like Measure N purports to be, but isn't.
Is there anything about Measure N that you support?
Yes, a no vote.
A no vote. Okay, that's straightforward. You're with the Tahoe Chamber. What other groups are part of your coalition?
We have another chamber in town, the South Tahoe Chamber. They are part of the coalition. The South Tahoe Association of Realtors, the South Lake Tahoe Lodging Association, the South Tahoe Restaurant Association, and we also have been joined by folks from the organization in town called Tahoe Keys Property Owners Association. So it's a pretty broad coalition, and we've been doing educational programs and urging people to read the measure for themselves. We have a website. We've, again, done a lot of outreach to the community and talked to a lot of people. And again, this has been very divisive, and this could have been avoided in the beginning if the folks would have accepted the city council's majority recommendation, which is we don't want to go there. But here we are at this point in time, and our campaign has been extremely active, and we're going to continue that right up until the vote.
As part of the chamber, you have a vested interest in the tourism economy. And so there are lots of different income levels when you talk about the tourism economy. What do you say to people who work in South Lake Tahoe? They're part of the lower end of the economy, and they want to live in South Lake Tahoe. They can't afford it. They're priced out. They have to do a long commute either from Carson City or Reno if you're on the North Shore, which can be a challenge with weather in the Sierra. And they feel that it's unfair that there are empty homes and other properties that remain vacant when, they're spending a majority of their time in the city and contributing to the economy.
Right. I guess the question is, are those vacant homes really accessible to the people that would like to live there? And we don't believe that they really are. But I also want to point out that we're looking at additional solutions. I mentioned a few minutes ago that not everybody who would like to live in South Lake Tahoe can do that. And some people don't want to do it. They were happier perhaps living in the Carson Valley, Carson City. You mentioned Reno. So I'm the chamber representative on an organization called the South Shore Transportation Management Association. and we've initiated a van pool program. So more employers are now, because they are getting employees from Carson Valley, Minden, Gardnerville, Carson City, Reno, even from Dayton, Nevada. So the idea is, as an employee, I can join a van pool. I come to work with colleagues of mine, neighbors of mine who live near me. We're all going to the same place of employment. We are all going home at the same time, and we can ride together in a van. One of us is the driver, or we take turns being a driver, and we get to work, and we can live where we want or where we can afford. Even if we had the ability to build as many homes as would be necessary to house all the people that want to live, who are essential workers in our community, we just wouldn't have the available land or the space to actually do it. So we're looking at these other options like van pools, which do prove to be very satisfactory for the people and for the employers, because it's an easy way for make sure your people get to work, make sure they get home, and do it in a relatively less expensive way than paying your own gas, driving your own vehicle. So there's a variety of options that we look at, not just building all this affordable housing in an area that really can't have that much more development.
Well, Steve, thank you for the time and sharing your perspective.
Thank you, Vicki. God bless you. We know you're on your own journey.
Oh, thank you so much. Steve Teshara is the Director of Government Relations at the Tahoe Chamber and co-chair of the No on Measure N campaign. We also heard from the Yes on Measure N campaign as well. Measure N, if approved by voters in November, would allow the city of South Lake Tahoe to tax homeowners whose properties remain vacant a majority of the year. Still ahead, as mocktails and alcohol-removed beer and wine become more popular, a local movement is asking people to experience wine country differently. We'll learn about Come Over October with our resident wine expert, Rick Cushman. You're listening to Insight here on Cap Radio. I'm your host, Vicki Gonzalez. We're back in just a moment.